Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Taking the Pain Out of Performance Reviews. My name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with Biz Library, and I'll be the host for today's session. Before we get started, I want to go through just a couple of housekeeping items. First, what you should see on the screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is the webinar viewer. This is where you'll see the content that we're sharing with you today. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is the control panel. So this is where you can join the audio portion of today's webinar, and you can also communicate with us through the question box. The default mode for the control panel is for it to collapse. If you want to open the control panel back up, simply click the orange box with the white arrow in it, and it'll expand for you. All of today's attendees are in listen-only mode. You can join the audio portion of today's webinar either through the teleconference line. You can also listen through your speakers. If you're going to listen through your speakers, I recommend either using a pair of headphones or a headset to get the best audio quality. We like to keep things pretty informal, so if you have any questions or discussion points, feel free to send them over through the question box that's located within the control panel. I like to weave the questions in as it relates to what we're discussing in the session, and then I'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. I am recording the webinar today, so I'll make a link to the webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information available on our blog after today's session. So that's bizlibrary.com/bizblog. Also, if you'd like to download the slides for today, I put a link to the slides in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You should have also received a link to the slides in the reminder email that you received this morning. Happy to say that today's session has been approved for 1 hour CE credit for all of you HR professionals attending. I'll make a link to the completion certificate available at the end of today's webinar. I'll also send a follow-up email within 24 hours, so you should get that email in your inbox around 4 p.m. Central Time today. That email will include a link to the completion certificate as well as the webinar recording and the slides. The most important thing on the completion certificate is the program ID number or the activity ID number. That's what you'll need to record with HRCI. If you'd like more information on certification or recertification, I encourage you to visit hrci.org. Again, hi, my name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with Biz Library. I've been working in the training and development industry now for about 5 years. I'm very active in social media, so I tweet on behalf of Biz Library at Biz Library and also at my own account at Jessel Petrie. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I like to share a lot of articles and discussions around learning and development, human resources, and marketing. So if you're on either of those social networks, I would love it if you'd reach out and connect. Presenting with us today is Chris Osborne. Chris is the VP of Marketing for Biz Library. He's also worked in a consulting capacity with a Paris-based leadership development consulting firm where he helped organizations design and implement leadership and executive development programs. He's been performing learning, development, and training functions formally since 2000 and informally for organizations since 1987. Prior to Chris's move into the business sector, he practiced law in the areas of labor, employment, and business litigation for over 12 years. He graduated from WashU School of Law with honors in 1987. Chris is also active in social media, so you can find him on Twitter at Chris Osborne, STL, and he's also active on LinkedIn, so I'm sure he'd love it if you'd reach out and connect as well. Just to give you a little bit of background on Biz Library, Biz Library is a leading provider of online employee training and e-learning solutions. The award-winning content library contains more than 7,000 online employee training videos covering every business training topic, so things like communication skills, leadership and management, sales and customer service, compliance and safety training, desktop computer skills, and more. Additionally, Biz Library's LMS and social learning technology platform help HR and training leaders improve and manage employee learning. All right, so enough about us. Quick poll question to kick things off for today. So you should see it pop up on your screen in just a minute. So what's your biggest pain with performance reviews? Is it A, infrequent, B, generic, C, not every goal is considered, D, not agile, or E, bad for engagement?
Hey Jessica, how are you doing today?
Hey Chris, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So now, keep in mind this poll question, we're asking about your biggest pain. We know that it could be some blend of all of the above, and it probably is. Just what's your single biggest complaint about performance reviews? And when we close the poll question, Jessica and I will share our personal answers as well. So I definitely have one. And sometimes it changes when I sit and think about performance reviews I've had in the past. Depends on which one I remember. So anyway, this is an interesting webinar. The thought leadership in this space has really undergone rather dramatic changes in the past, I'd say, 8 to 10 years. So it's really fun topic to talk about, I think.
Yeah, and I'm maybe an informal poll. How many people are working on performance reviews now? Or maybe it's Q4 or Q1. That's generally when people start doing them. So this may be a very timely topic. It may be a topic that you're like, get me out of here. I don't want to talk about performance reviews, but who knows?
Happy holidays. Let's hear from you.
Right.
Here's your gift.
Some say they just finished them. So you're familiar with the pain if you just finished them. No, just kidding. Sometimes they're not that bad, I guess. Okay, I'll go ahead and close it out. Looks like we've got good participation so far today. So I'll go ahead and close it out. Share the results with everyone. So we've got 41% say it's generic, 22% say infrequent, 19% not every goal is considered, 11% not agile, and 8% bad for engagement.
All right, so what's your biggest complaint?
I would say, well, it's a few things, but today I would say that generic. So I get frustrated when it's like, especially if you know anything about the performance review process and you're like, that's obviously a sentence that they just copied off of a sheet that says, okay, these are acceptable behavior statements that you can use for this employee, or you can say, okay, there's the verbiage that's used just doesn't really feel that personal or that relevant all the time. Plus, if you're only doing it one time a year, so this falls into the other pain. If you're only doing it one time a year, they're infrequent. So what are you really reflecting on? It's just the recency effect. So you're just thinking of, okay, what just happened? And if you don't take good notes, then you're not going to remember things all along the way.
Yeah, those are both totally valid and legitimate. For at least in my professional experience, I've had, depending upon the review and the company, it could be any one of the above. But when I think back on like reviews that I walked out of just fuming, and by the way, I've never walked out of a performance review that I can remember feeling good. It's never happened. I'd say the one that really sticks out for me is the not every goal considered. I've never really had I've never been successful in jobs where they were very linear. I've been most successful when I do lots of different things. And the totality of what I've done for companies has just never, ever been considered. So anyway, interesting stuff. So we'll talk about all of this as we get into today's session. So
yeah,
thank you for participating.
Yes, I agree. So there's 3 high-level things that we'll talk about today. Chris, I'm going to pass the ball over to you. You can run us through those, and then we'll keep going.
All right. And I see questions in chat already firing up, so that is great. Keep them coming. Those of you that have been on webinars with Jessica and I before know we will take questions and comments as we go, and Jessica does a great job of monitoring that and fitting them in. So please feel free to participate with us. We frequently learn as much from the audience participation as I think sometimes we teach people that come to the webinar. So help us out. Okay, so we really want to talk about 3 sort of strategic pieces of the puzzle. I want to talk about, at a high level, sort of the functional role of performance management, because performance reviews, if you really think about it, the performance review is a part of a broader, should be a part of broader performance management. So we want to talk about what we really ought to be aiming at with performance reviews and performance management more broadly, okay? And I want to tie these together real closely so you can, I want to link these concepts together. I want to talk about why we do them, and part of my background here will come into play. We'll explain that in just a minute. And then the third piece of this, and this really gets into sort of best practices around performance reviews and performance management more broadly. I want to talk to you about why continuous learning and development becomes so central in actually moving the needle from making performance reviews something that don't work very well frequently to something that actually improves the performance and level of engagement of your employees and their supervisors and managers. So I'll give you another, I think, an interesting way to think about it a little bit. So let's start with some numbers. And Jessica puts these infographics together for us. It's one of the reasons they look so good. You wouldn't want to see the way I would do this, but part of the power of this particular slide is just these numbers. I mean, think about this. 45% of HR leaders think annual performance reviews are not an accurate appraisal of employees' work. That's according to a 2012 SHRM survey. By the way, I haven't seen anything more recent that says it's gotten better. At least 30% of performance reviews ended up in decreased employee performance. That's at least 30%, according to an article published in Psychology Bulletin. And then 45% of employees think clear, honest communication from managers would actually improve the quality of management. That's according to an employee survey specialist, ETS. Now, just think for just a second about the senior leadership in your organizations, your CEOs, your CFOs, whoever, vice president level. Is there another process, important process, in your entire organization in which metrics at this poor level would be accepted? The answer is no. I promise you the answer is no. But we continue to accept this type of outcome from performance reviews. Guy Browning's a British humorist and writer. This is a kind of a funny, flippant way to look at it. Appraisals are where you get together with your team leader and agree what an outstanding member of the team you are, how much your contribution has been valued, what massive potential you have, and in recognition of all of this, would you mind having your salary halved? Well, that's probably closer to the reality of it lately than any of us would like to admit, but in its ridiculousness, it kind of strikes at some of the heart of it. There's a wonderful book published by our friends Dan and Ken Cooper called The Terrible Twos of Training. So we adopted a bit of that to some information we found in a really great book about performance reviews. It's titled Fearless Performance Reviews, Coaching Conversations That Turn Every Employee into a Star Player, written by Jeffrey and Linda Russell. It was published earlier this year. Really, really good read, and we're going to talk quite a bit about some of the concepts and ideas suggested by the Russells in this book. But they talk about issues, common issues with performance reviews, and like I said, we sort of adapted this sort of idea of the terrible twos. There's too much at stake in a single meeting. They tend to be too judgmental. Too often we talk about uncomfortable truths in such a formal setting, too much fixing blame, too few managers are skilled at them, too much uncertainty, too little control on the part of the employee, and too many one-way conversations. And if you are honest with yourself and you think back over your own career and your own experience with performance reviews, you've probably had this experience in many of them, if not all of them, or certainly some of them. And the problem becomes the first two. There's too much at stake in these meetings. And if the manager's not skilled, this just can be such a massive problem for organizations, coupled with the fact that we're not very good at them. It just gets to be such a royal pain. Now, these are the 5 choices that we gave you in the poll earlier today, and these were, we didn't make these up. These came from a blog post that we found at a place called TLNT, which, by the way, if you don't follow that site, we strongly recommend that you do so. They really publish some fantastic pieces of information particularly for HR and performance leaders, but they talked about problems with performance reviews. Infrequent. Jessica mentioned this when I asked her about it. This kind of once a year sort of thing. How can you really talk about an entire year's performance in a 1-hour meeting, and then you end up, like Jessica mentioned, this recency bias? I've certainly had that happen to me. And then the generic, and we've seen these tools sold where you have this standard plain vanilla language dropped in, and you can tell that it's plain vanilla. And as a recovering lawyer, I used to coach HR professionals to do that very thing. It's a mistake. We end up not treating our employees very respectfully that way. I mean, don't do that. It's a big mistake. And then, like I said, not every goal is considered. Think about, over the course of a year, think about how many different things you are asked to do because projects come up, things emerge that you didn't anticipate at the beginning of the year, and you get tasks and projects completed as the year goes along, and you end up with 2 or 3 high-level strategic goals, but all of these other things were done over the course of the year. Is it possible really to consider all of that contribution, the totality of the contribution? They're not agile, which reflects that same idea, particularly in this work world, when things change so fast and so rapidly. We have this sort of static performance review. We've all seen the forms, right? We've got these forms you have to fill, and then they're bad for engagement. Employees hate them. I promise you, your employees hate them. And the data is pretty clear. These don't work. They don't engage employees. I mean, if the idea of performance management is to do the opposite of all of this, then it's not working. So why do we even do them? Why do we do them? I think you're going to hear, and I used to have to deal with this both as a HR executive and when I used to practice law. They're defensive. You document performance problems. Well, we're having problems with Chris. We've got to make sure that that's documented. Did we document the time he said something, ugly to Sally, and did we document the argument he had with Ed, and document performance problems? Okay, well, that's really motivating, isn't it? We recognize high performers. Well, if they're demotivating and they're infrequent and they're not, they don't work really well for that. Identify developmental needs. We're doing that once a year, really? And we're going to keep people up to date with the demands of a rapidly evolving and changing work for compensation. There's a lot of thought leadership about the need to uncouple performance reviews from compensation and how dangerous it is for morale, for performance, for all kinds of things to do that. I honestly think when I moved from the practice of law into the HR profession and began to talk to people about why we do them, because I've never liked them very much, I honestly think the last answer is probably more often the case. I think we do them because we're supposed to, truthfully. I don't know that we've really thought this through a lot. I think we do annual performance reviews because we're supposed to. Because if we did them for the right reasons, I don't know that we would do them. If you don't know who Aubrey Daniels is, I encourage you to look him up. He is known as the father of performance management. He's written some incredible books, the Daniels Institute in Atlanta, one of the true thought leaders in the space of performance management and how to really motivate employees and move employees from point A to point B. Really provocative writer, great, interesting thought leader. But I love this quote: "The best kind of performance review is no performance review." A lot of people won't tell you this, but they don't need to document your good performance, just your poor one. That way they have written documentation that'll help them get rid of you without fear of retribution. Now, that makes me feel good. And then here's another great quote. This appeared in an article titled "Wired for Success," which was reproduced in Psychology Today. This is from Ray B. Williams. And this is another really excellent perspective, particularly given today's work world. Clearly, the annual performance review was designed for a work environment where control of individual employee performance was a key function. In today's team and collaborative environment, that perspective no longer makes sense. I would add to this that when we are managing and leading organizations of knowledge workers, where control of individual employee performance is no longer a key function, where instead the collection, dissemination, and use of organizational IQ and organizational knowledge is a key function, performance reviews have clearly outlived their usefulness. And we have to think of performance management and the role of performance reviews in a whole new light, which gets to this idea: what are we trying to accomplish? If you really step back and think about it, at its core, performance management and performance reviews are a part of that. They're a process within the broader performance management space. The idea is to actually help improve performance. Now, if we begin there, if that's the first place we go, we are dedicated to improving the performance of two critical elements under our control. The first is our organization. The second are our employees. We want to improve organizational performance by improving employee performance. If that's the purpose, if that's the strategic objective, then we need to rethink how we're doing it, which means we need to change our mindset to a collaborative coaching approach to this. And there are 5 best practices we're going to talk about today. But this mindset switch is really, really important. And this, I have to thank, I mentioned the Russells earlier. This is the Jeffrey and Linda Russell. This is a really fascinating book. I recommend this book highly. I don't recommend a lot of business books, but this is one that I really got a lot out of. And they set up this continuum. And the concept is that in every situation, every relationship, you choose a position on this mindset continuum. There's a my way mindset, and then there's a collaborative mindset. Now, I don't want to take a judgment position on either end of the spectrum, because to be perfectly honest, there are times when you have to take a my way mindset. Somebody's done something wrong. They've behaved inappropriately. They've made a serious mistake. And you simply have to tell them, you are wrong. You're thinking about this incorrectly. Your behavior must change, okay? So that's one type of a conversation. The problem is performance reviews the traditional approach to them tended to go there. But we have choices frequently to make outside of those extreme situations where we can move towards this collaborative mindset. And as a manager, we can approach the situation thinking, well, I have something to learn too, and accept the fact that, well, people are doing their best. Let's think about that for just a brief moment and think about just that single change in mindset when you're talking to somebody that's maybe not performing at the level you'd like them to perform. It's not necessarily that they are actually doing their best, but they want to do their best. They really would like to be successful. If you approach people with that sort of a positive framework, you're going to be surprised, I think, how frequently people will rise to the occasion and do that. But if you approach people with a skeptical or cynical perspective that they're going to try to take advantage of you or not do their best or not want to do their best, people will typically, meet your expectations. But people are going to do their best. It's also great to think about, I only know part of the story. I don't know how to do all of this. I don't know what. And the idea that we can both win. Okay. The part of this that I entered the workforce a long time ago. Demographically, I'm described as a baby boomer, actually part of Generation Jones, the younger part of that generation. But the piece of this that was the hardest for me to truly embrace, not just to do, but to truly embrace, was the first part, the I have something to learn. When I first entered the work world, meeting with my boss or supervisors, managers, or people that were more senior to me in the work world, it typically was an I'm right, you're wrong kind of situation, particularly in the practice of law. So this was a hard shift for me to make, but I can promise you that the results for me personally and for my teams have been much, much better as I've picked that up. Okay, so this collaborative coaching mindset, this is sort of what this becomes about. This is a focus on continuous learning together. Okay, now we are seeing this demographic tsunami overtake us in the work world. The rise of the millennials. In just a few years, over half of the workforce are going to be made up of that generation. This is a generation that is hardwired to collaborate. And we have got to embrace this in a whole range of business disciplines, from our training and development to our management skills to just everything. So this is another place where we're going to have to embrace the concept of collaboration, and that is actually working to improve performance together. It's got to be about improvement, and it's got to be about mutual conversations about discovery and help the employee improve and learn. I know that's the same as the first, but it really is that important. Jessica, you have you're a millennial, but when you talk about this sort of generational, and I don't want to use the word in a pejorative sense, but a generational bias towards collaboration, you have a really, really interesting way of explaining that.
Well, sure. I mean, if you think about the way that most people of the millennial generation have gone through school and gone through college and entered into the workforce, most of the time that we were encouraged to challenge the status quo. We worked in teams. We had group test taking. We were encouraged to share our ideas and also, learn from other people. So coming into the workforce, it can be off-putting if you're given that kind of authoritative, my way, the highway kind of mindset. Also the way that you look at change. So if you're looking at, many times, you're looking at, when I look at change, I usually think, oh, it's an opportunity for improvement. But that's not the case with everyone else. So looking at how you can kind of balance some of these pushes and pulls and need for collaboration and need for kind of understanding why we're doing change. Is it really the best opportunity for change? Looking at things from a team environment. So maybe you look at these performance reviews, or not so much of an annual performance review, but performance conversations in a team way. So instead of maybe saying, well, you did this, you didn't do that, looking at the numbers as a whole and how maybe you contributed and how maybe you can move forward. I don't know if I can explain that well. I wasn't positive what you were getting at. Okay.
No, you explained it very well. It's you did. You explained it really well. It's, you were brought up entered an educational environment, a social environment, where this was the norm. Behaviorally, culturally, this is the norm. And you're bringing that perception, that expectation with you to work. Okay, so performance reviews. How do we take this coaching collaborative mindset into this process, this piece of performance management, and really shift things so that what we are doing is actually working with our employees to improve performance? Well, here you go. Here are the 5 critical keys to effective performance management. And it doesn't make any difference what system, what tool, what you're doing. If you do these 5 things well, you are going to see positive results. First, you set clear goals. Second, you determine the key job responsibilities. And we'll talk about how to do that in just a minute. Identify and use competencies. This 4th one is so critical. You coach on a day-to-day basis and provide continuous feedback. And then your assessment of performance and needs is honest and objective. If you'll do those 5 things, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And the trick is going to be to teach and coach and support your managers and supervisors as they learn to do these things. All right, goal setting. Let's start this really is where it begins. You know, we have to be aiming at the right things if we're going to do this well. So does the goal you are setting promote the goals you set for the organization as a whole? And it is stunning how frequently we miss the target on that. You know, we ask employees to do certain things that they're really not at all related to what we need the team to do or the organization to do or the department to do. We have to get these things tied together, okay? It just really is an extremely important thing to do. The next piece of this, or the next two steps to this, is the goal difficult yet attainable for the employee? If the goal is too easy, nobody cares. It's not motivating. In fact, it's demotivating. And then, can you measure it? I have not, over the course of my career, always been the most metric-driven person. There's a reason I didn't go to business school. There's a reason I'm not in finance and accounting. I'm not motivated that way. However, now I find myself in marketing where we measure everything, and it turns out that I kind of like the idea of being able to look at something and see whether it's successful and understand clearly whether it is or isn't. And it turns out to be extremely important to this piece of it. So is the goal difficult yet attainable, and can we measure it? There's a great book written by Daniel Pink called Drive, The Surprising Things That Motivate Us, which is really an outstanding, provides a great strategic framework that really helps clarify some of this stuff. So really important thing. So as you're starting to think about setting performance goals, this is one way to begin to kind of think this through a little bit. You know, our organizational goal is to become a market leader, and you know, we would want to put metrics around that. So we want to be, you know, have 10% of the market. We currently have 7.5. Whatever that, however you would measure that. So our customer service goal, to support that, we want to deal with customer complaints efficiently. So how would that be defined from a metrics perspective? We want to resolve them 90% on first call. We want to answer calls at a certain rate, whatever the metrics are that go to that. And then so the customer service representatives, they have to be a part of that effort by dealing with the complaints efficiently. So how would that performance be measured? Okay, so there's the goals, and but each step along the way, you're going to want to make sure that you are able to measure what success looks like. So there's two questions that you ask yourself. What will success look like, and how will we measure it? So two parts to that inquiry. And this really gets to this piece of the puzzle, which is determining the key job responsibilities. And when I talked about what does successful performance look like, I was referring right to that customer service rep, at that level. We typically understand what our top employees do, how they do their jobs, what they do that makes them successful. We can typically say, yep, Tom's really good, Jessica's really good at her job, you know, Phil's really good at his job, you know, Martha's really good at her job, Ann's good at her job, whatever the employee is, okay? We know what successful performance looks like. So that's great. But the critical inquiry becomes, how do we know it? What are the key indicators that tell us really the difference between those 5 employees' performance in their specific role and employees who do the same jobs but not at the same level? What are the indicators, the metrics, things that we can measure that help us understand the differentiation in outcomes? Okay? Now, the real key to this then becomes finding out exactly what it is those successful employees are really doing to drive success. And this is where we have to take job descriptions and put them aside for a while. Think about a job description this way. A job description is sort of like your wish list at Amazon or at some other shopping site where you just put your wish list down and you've got 67 things on it or 15 things on it, and boy, wouldn't it be nice to have all of these things. You don't need all of those things. That's what a job description really is. It's more of a wish list. Your top performers probably don't do everything that's in the job description at a really high level. They probably perform at a really high level on 3 or 4 things that really drive performance. Those are the key job responsibilities that you want to make sure you teach and train all of your employees to do well. And you want to make sure that the strengths of the employees are matched by the key job responsibilities necessary for success in the role. I can't emphasize enough how important working to strengths are. And there's some great data out there that tells us that this is really important. Gallup publishes a report every year called State of the American Workplace. If you don't read this report each year, you should. Not only does it have incredible data, but there's actionable information in it. They tell us things that we can do to improve the level of employee engagement in our organization. So it's not just this depressing thing that says only 1 in 3 of our employees are engaged and 2/3 of our employees are actively disengaged. There's that data. But they also tell us, look, to move your employees from actively disengaged to engaged, here's what you do. Managers have unique opportunities in their daily interactions. Now notice it doesn't say annual, it said daily interactions with employees, to empower them to discover and develop their strengths. And they have the ability to position employees in roles where they can do what they do best every day. Employees who feel engaged at work and are able to use their strengths in their jobs are more productive and profitable and have higher quality work. 3 bottom line, big time benefits to teaching our managers to place employees in positions to be successful by letting them use their strengths. They're more productive, they're more profitable, and they deliver higher quality work. Play to people's strengths, okay? That is hugely important. So we have identified what success looks like. We've figured out how we're going to measure it. We know what the critical behaviors are that separate our top performers from the other performers in the organization. So now, what are the competencies necessary to master in order to perform those behaviors effectively? That's the next step in this process. Identify and use competencies. Now, there are 3 high-level, 3 types of competencies that all of us possess on some level. There's core competencies. These are the things that you would describe as necessary for success in your industry and for your organization's culture. So for instance, if you're in the telecommunications industry, there are just things that you need to know about the industry and some baseline skills and things you have to be able to do to be successful. And within your organization, there are some cultural anchors that are going to be important. Here at Biz Library, for us, it's like Smarter Every Friday. We really want everybody to be continuous learners. That's a sort of a cultural anchor, kind of a core competency that's common to all of our employees, okay? Or we want it to be common to everybody. Then there's job family competencies, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Your HR professionals have certain HR competencies at different levels of mastery based upon the job role, but HR competencies, accounting and finance competencies, operational competencies, safety competencies, whatever the job family are. And then you get down employee by employee, those job role competencies, and the right level of mastery required for success in each role as defined by those critical behaviors measured against your top employees. All right, Jessica, we've gone through 3 of the 5 best practices. This is usually a good place to take a breath and make sure everybody's with us and see if there are any questions that I should take before I move into the final 2 of the 5 best practices.
I do. I have 3 questions, Chris. So first one's from Barbara. So you mentioned agile a few times. So can you explain a little bit what you mean by being agile?
Well, I'm going to explain that in a couple of different contexts. First, in the context of performance reviews not being agile, what I'm referring to there, there's an acronym that we use a lot in webinars and in some of the writing that we do. It's VUCA, V-U-C-A, and it's an acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we use this acronym to describe this business market. And it's actually pretty accurate if you think about it. Organizations and leaders and employees that are going to be successful in that kind of an environment need agility. They need to be adaptable, be able to learn new skills, unlearn old skills, be able to move seamlessly from one type of function to another. And annual performance reviews don't typically reflect adaptability and agility on the part of employees whose jobs have evolved or sort of changed rather dramatically from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I'm going to use marketing. This is because it's my field. It's the profession that I'm the closest to these days. Well, actually, I can use this in learning and development too, because so many things are happening with us as well. Just think of how much technology-based learning, like mobile and so many things that social learning platforms have crept into what we do. I mean, if we had a performance review that, a form that we had built 3 or 4 years ago, and now we're going to do an annual performance review that says we have to deliver this much classroom training and this many courses, but we're no longer really, our employees aren't engaged in it, they're not doing it anymore, they're really focused on online and social learning. So the performance review, if we adhere strictly to that, it hasn't changed to reflect what we're really doing, even though what we're really doing is delivering great results to our employees. That's what we mean by not agile. And when you're only reviewing performance once a year based upon some set of benchmarks that you tried to, like a line you drew in the sand a year ago, that's what we mean. An agile approach to performance is more in line with the next best practice we're going to get to. This is this continuous coaching and feedback, where Jessica used a really good term earlier, these sort of continuous improvement conversations, an ongoing conversation about learning and improvement. That's how you get to agility. So everybody is continuously collaborating and learning and finding new and interesting ways to do things. That's how you achieve agility. Okay?
All right, 2 more questions. One's on competencies, one's on accountability. So question from Terry. So what's the optimal number of competencies to have in each category? So for example, core, job, family, or job role.
Great question, and I'm going to give you not such a great answer, so I'm going to apologize in advance for this. It depends a lot on the specific needs of your organization and your industry. So core competencies, that may be as few as 2 or 3. It could be 5. I would be very hesitant to say it's much more than that. Now, job family competencies, that's going to depend completely on the chosen field. Okay? So in marketing, it could be as many as 6 or 7, and HR could be 9 or 10. But the trick, really, where you really want to hone in on it, is at the job role level, the correct level of mastery, because this is really where individual development plans and working for improvement occurs. It's at that job role level. And this is kind of the rubber meets the road kind of thing. And what you want people to focus on in terms of their learning and their development is truly no more than 2 or 3, maybe 4, but I would say 2 or 3 competencies. And when you go back and really focus on the key functions, the critical things that people are doing in jobs to be successful, you're going to find they're focusing really on 3 or 4 things, and that's it. They're not focusing on the 9 or 12 or 15 things that are in job descriptions. They're focused on 3 or 4 things that they're doing on a regular basis, and that typically falls to that job role level, that level of mastery. Okay, so the total number of competencies might be as high as 12 or 15, depending upon the job, but the real focus is on those competencies that we're trying to improve at any given time, and that should be no more than 3 or 4.
Okay, this next question will lead us right into the 4th best practice of coaching and feedback. So this one's from Laura. She asks, how can you hold managers accountable for their role in performance management, ensuring that they're providing constant coaching and feedback and having frequent performance discussions with their employees?
Well, that is a perfect question, and the trick really isn't difficult. It is you make it a part of your expectations for them, and just like we're going to teach you what we're going to talk about here, just like you're going to teach your managers in terms of their continuous feedback and coaching with employees, with the managers' managers, you do the same thing. You're continuously teaching the managers of managers to talk to them and coach and find out what's going on with the coaching, with the feedback, with the development of their employees. You know, Jessica may be surprised to know that my boss and I talk about her frequently. How's she doing? What's going on? How are you helping her improve? And we talked about that quite a bit when Jessica first joined my team. We don't talk about that so much now once it was pretty clear that I had a clue, I kind of knew what I was doing, and Jessica was actually doing really, really well and seemed to be growing professionally at a really rapid rate. You hold people accountable by living what you preach and having the managers talk to the managers about this and ask about it and inquire about it. And this is an ongoing conversation from top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. This is not something that just happens at the supervisory level. You know, my immediate supervisor is the owner of the company, and Dean and I do this all the time. I talk to Dean 4 or 5 times a day, and we are constantly talking. We had a conversation this morning. We had a meeting with one of the sales reps this morning, and Dean said, I wish I'd have gotten on the call earlier. Here's how I might have done that a little differently. And I'm like, oh, God, it's a great bit of advice. I mean, this is not something that is just for the frontline managers. This is something that everybody in the organization, everyone, has to embrace. And I'm not talking about training here either. This is not, I mean, that's a part of this. We need training, we need to build foundational knowledge and build foundational skills. We're presuming that that is happening, okay? This is something different. This is, about advice and counsel and providing support. Sometimes you fall flat on your can. It just happens. You just have, Jessica and I had a webinar earlier this week where, it didn't go as well as we'd like for it to have, and we were kind of patting each other on the back going, it's okay, it wasn't you. Those things happen. Sometimes you have to provide support to each other, and that's important as well. You provide guidance. You help boost confidence. It's a different kind of relationship that we're talking about. Going back to that collaborative mindset, this is not a my way or highway situation. Coaching and learning to give feedback is a much different kind of relationship, a much different looking give and take. And there is give and take in this. That's the other part of this. This is not a one-way street by any means. Again, I'm going to use Jessica and I as an example. We collaborate very closely on all of the content that goes out the door here at Biz Library. I'll write first drafts, Jessica edits, she puts the graphics together. We're frequently, Jessica will send something back and say, hey, I think this is light, I need help with this part of the content, what do you think here? And I'm constantly that's what this is about. This is a mutual learning relationship. And that's the mindset that you have to get sort of built throughout your entire organization. And it is not something that is exclusive at the supervisory management level. Like I said, I have this relationship with the owner of this company. And to be honest, I provided coaching to him this week on some other issues. I mean, that's what this is about. This is about building a culture where this becomes part of the DNA, part of the fabric of how your organization moves forward. So anyway, I don't know if I'm explaining that very well or not, Jessica. You can tell I'm kind of passionate about this, but that's really what it is. David Sedaris, if you don't know who he is one of the funniest comedians you'll ever find in your life. I love this quote. I haven't got the slightest idea of how to change people, but I keep a long list of prospective candidates just in case I should ever figure it out. I just love that quote. So then the fifth of the 5 best practices. And this is one of the hardest ones, by the way. It's the objective appraisal of performance. Now, a lot of times, and I've run into this many, many times over the course of my rather long and winding and torturous career in many ways, a lot of people think objective means it's data-driven. It's all about facts and stats, and that's not what I'm saying. Objective means fair. That's what it is. Objective means fair. Now, step back and think about that for just a brief moment. We pay our managers and supervisors and executives to exercise their judgment, their professional judgment, to make decisions all the time. And frequently we have to make decisions without having every single piece of data we'd like to have to make the decision. We have to do our best with that. But that's what we're paid to do. We're paid to make the best decisions we can fairly, right? Well, we do the same thing with performance reviews. We can't always have every data and fact and stat. And guess what? Our employees don't expect that either. But what our employees do expect is that we're fair. That's what they expect. So if you tell them something, they expect you to follow through. If it's fair to be their advocate from time to time. It's fair to be their coach, their counselor from time to time. But that's what this is about. It's about being fair. Okay? So it's helpful to keep timely notes and records so that you can make sure that you're talking about the same things. It is fair to talk to people about what you've observed, and we expect supervisors, managers, vice presidents, directors to exercise a degree of professional judgment. Okay? That's what all of that goes into. Jessica, you put together this next slide, and I love this very much. This is a really great sort of roadmap. I'm going to let you walk us through this.
Sure. So in thinking about what we've been talking about today, most of it is really focused around continuous learning and development. So instead of just taking that end of the year or beginning of the year, whenever you do that opportunity to grow and look at opportunities ahead, think of how you can work this in throughout the year. So one way is to create individual development plans, skills development plans, however you want to call them, whatever works well in your organization. But the key is to really make the plan that's achievable. So consider just selecting a few key skills. So here's an example of a skill of leading meetings for a manager. So you want to outline what that skill or capability is. What are some of the development opportunities or options that are available to that employee? So in this case, we chose a video that's available to them. What's the key action, or what are they going to have to do on the job that's going to help them grow and develop? So in this case, it was gather with the team, discuss meeting management, create expectations, and then apply them to future meetings, both with the team and for the project. And they're going to review it on a monthly basis. So you could do this with a lot of different skills and capabilities, but the idea is make them achievable, select just a few skills, and then they're going to continuously grow and learn throughout the year instead of just after the review or right before they know they're going to be reviewed.
Yeah, it's great. And from my perspective, the most exciting piece of this was my development action. Gather with your team. Gather with your team. So it's not putting somebody out there on their own. This is a collaborative thing. Lots of stakeholders involved. It's not just the leader. It's how the leader manages the team. Anyway, really great stuff. So again, just a real quick review of the 5 keys to effective performance management. So again, it doesn't matter the methodology. It doesn't matter the system you use. Set clear goals. Okay? Determine those key job responsibilities. And again, kind of put your job descriptions aside and really focus in on those 3 or 4 things that your top performers do routinely and regularly to deliver those great results. And then identify and use the competencies that support those behaviors. Coach, teach your managers, supervisors, directors, VPs, everybody. Teach people how to coach on a day-to-day basis and set it up so that continuous feedback becomes a part of what happens, which is going to build this sort of learning, continuous improvement sort of culture in your organization, and make sure that people can be honest and objective with one another, and you are setting yourself up for really stunning opportunities for improvement. All right, Jessica, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. So continue to send over questions. I have a few recommended resources for everyone as a follow-up to today's webinar. This first one is one of the best leadership courses I've seen this year, and I've watched a ton of courses and videos that we have available. So it's called Leadership Feedback, What Employees Want to Tell You But Don't. So in looking at the duration, it's about 17 minutes in length, which is a little bit longer than a lot of the videos that we have, but it's really a must-see for all of your managers. So it looks at two different leaders or managers in the organization and the way that they give employees feedback and the way that they approach different situations. There's some humor involved, but it's really great. You're looking at real examples. You can totally relate. It's completely up to date. So I recommend this for all of your managers or anyone in a leadership role. This next one is on coaching skills. So we talked about coaching and continuous feedback. This is a 5-part series that'll take you through different phases and how to give coaching and feedback to different employees that you're managing on your team. This next one is great managers help people hone their strengths. So this comes from Marcus Buckingham. He's the author of the book First Break All the Rules. It's a short video, 2 minutes in length. It's great about productivity, practices, leading, and managing. So I recommend that one as well. And then one more recommendation is on emotional intelligence. So it's a growing competency, a competency that's growing in importance all across different organizations, no matter what industry you're in. This is a series that I recommend you give to all of your employees and your managers as well. So all the recommended resources I had for today, they're all included in the Biz Library collection. You're welcome to do a free trial of any of the resources. I'll put up a poll throughout the question period. Just let me know if you'd like to do a free 30-day trial. If you can't access the poll, you can also just let me know either through email or through chat. All right, so first question. Chris, if you saw one you want to grab, you can grab it, or I can also grab one for you. I think he's probably on mute, so I'll just grab one for him. So this first question is from Brian. So Brian asks, how would I test the measurement of my goals to determine if they're appropriate in measuring performance of staff?
You know, I saw that question too, and I was going to grab another one because I thought this one was really hard. So I'll tackle it. Brian, great question. I'm a big believer in sort of, A/B testing. We do a lot of that in our marketing world, and unfortunately, you probably don't have a lot of room for A/B testing. So this gets back to identifying those really critical indicators of success. We talked about asking two questions. What does success look like, and how will I know it? So when you are identifying your successful performance in a specific job role, you identify those high performers, it's going to be really important to understand the critical behaviors that in fact drive success. What are the things that separate the top performers from the middle performers? And then figure out how those things can be measured, okay? So for instance, for inside sales representatives, it may be activity-based. How many calls, how many contacts can you make that lead to trials, that lead to opportunity? I mean, that's what you're going to have to figure out how to measure. But it really comes down to figuring out the behaviors that separate top performers from from less effective performers, and then figuring out how to measure those behaviors. And those are the things that you want to that you'll work with.
All right, this next question is from Tim. So when identifying employee strengths, how do you know where to put them to work? If I manage an operational crew and the person being evaluated works well in a strategic environment, does that mean you tell the person to move on?
Well, not necessarily. That is a really perplexing challenge that a lot of us face, but it really kind of comes down to sort of strategically how you want to approach your talent acquisition and broader talent management challenges to begin with. And there's a theory that says, the first challenge is to get the right people on the bus. I think this is the Collins good to great kind of approach to this, which I don't adhere to everything Mr. Collins writes about, but I think this is actually a really good approach. Find the right people. Get the right people into your organization. So maybe this isn't the right specific role, but once you get the right people in your organization, now you find the right seat on the bus, so to speak, for them. So use the example in the question. You've got an operational team, but you've got a person whose strengths are more strategic, but maybe they're wired the way you need employees to be wired that are going to be successful. Maybe their values match up with what the organization needs to be successful, a whole range of possibilities. The trick is going to be to find that role, to identify that ideal role where they're going to be successful, and either create a spot for them, or find out when an opportunity is going to be available. But that's really how you have to approach that.
All right, looks like we are up on time, so I'll go ahead and wrap up for today. For those of you that are attending for HRCI credit, I put a link to the certificate in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a reminder, I'll also send a follow-up email that you'll receive around 4 p.m. Central Time today. That email will include a link to the certificate, webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information. Hope you'll join us for a future webinar. Next week's session is on employee training and development, how to measure effectiveness and impact. After next week, we have a little break for the holidays, and then we will be back in January. So hope you'll consider joining us for a future session. All of them are on our website at bizlibrary.com/webinars. So again, thanks for all the great questions today. Thanks for attending with us, and thanks, Chris, for presenting.
Yes, thanks everybody for attending, and I hope to see you on next week's webinar, or one after the first of the year.